Mr. Zackheim. Thank you all the witnesses for your excellent testimony, and all of your written statements will be made part of the record without objection. Thank you. Dr. Hill, President Putin has made several speeches over the years where he has made it clear he wants to restore the Russian Empire. So if he succeeds in the Ukraine, can we have reasonable certainty he'll continue these efforts in other countries?
I think, Senator Reid, that we can. He's already made it very clear, as you've discussed, that he's interested in reacquiring territory in what was the space of the former Russian Empire. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, we recognize Russia as the successor state to the Soviet Union, which was itself the successor state to the Russian Empire, and in fact reincorporated many of the territories that were lost after the Russian Revolution. So Putin has made it very clear, of course, that the priorities are the Slavic states, Belarus and Ukraine, but also Moldova. And we've just heard recently in the last few days, I'm sure people have been reading the press reports, that the Moldovan government feels under incredible strain and has been getting intel itself that Russia is planning, some kind of aggression against them. And of course also Kazakhstan, because northern Kazakhstan was settled by Slavs, Ukrainians and Russians in the Soviet period. So all of those countries feel a great deal of anxiety. We can also say, of course, that our allies and partners in Poland, the Baltic states, which were forcibly taken into the Soviet Union during World War II, Finland, which was attacked by the Soviet Union in 1939-1940, and other countries in their neighbourhood feel similarly threatened by this expansionary nature of Russian aims. And Putin has said the world needs to get used to the fact that Russia is territorially expanding again. And in fact, Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, has demanded that the rest of Europe accept these new realities. So even if we were to have a settlement based on some kind of recognition of the frontier lines that are now holding on the front, even a temporary one, we should be very certain that Russia under Putin and the people around him will look for every opportunity to push beyond that at some time in the future. In fact, that's what we've seen in Ukraine from the beginning. 2014 was the beginning of a process, not the end of Russia's territorial aims.
Now, you mentioned settlement. Can you give us any indication of what it would take to get Putin to sit down and have some type of settlement?
Well, right now there's not much indication of that, just to be frank. I mean, I think this is a pretty grim picture, in part because Putin didn't feel deterred in the first place, as I think all of us have mentioned here. The other thing is that Putin also feels that he has a lot of support from the rest of the world, including from China. And I think it would be very interesting to hear from Dr. Lin about really what China's views of this are now, because unfortunately it may very well take countries like China pushing Russia for there to be any break in Putin's resolve at this particular moment. It would have to be, I think, other countries beyond the United States and its Western allies demonstrating to Putin in some fashion behind the scenes or more directly that this war is not in their interest and that they want him to move towards the negotiating table. Right now, the circumstances on the ground are such that Putin really believes that he can push more manpower there. And this gets back to what Mr. Zackheim was already saying about the importance of looking at the battlefield. But we need to have a diplomatic initiative. We need to get the rest of the international community behind us in support of pushing Russia back.
Thank you. And I always recognize an excellent question. So, Dr. Lin, can you comment upon the Chinese reaction to Ukraine, and particularly their willingness at some point to step up and help contain? I would note that they've made statements against the use of nuclear weapons, which are somewhat encouraging. Dr. Lin.
Sure, thank you. Senator Reid, if you recall, at the very beginning of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the position that China took was, I would say, very, very much pro-Russia. Today, China's position is still that the United States and our NATO allies are responsible for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And what we're seeing is some shift since last year of China's position in terms of not fully taking Russia's position politically, as China wants to salvage its relationship with particularly our European colleagues. We're also seeing that there is increasing reporting of Chinese support by select smaller Chinese companies for example, providing of surveillance equipment for the Wagner Group, as well as Russian operations in Ukraine. And we also know that China's trade with Russia increased 34% last year. So as we move forward, I think one thing we need to pay attention to is what might push China more in Russia's direction. And I worry that as China looks at how strong our position is with our allies and partners, China might feel it needs a stronger partner internationally, and it doesn't have too many options. And Russia is unfortunately one of the partners that China is keen to keep.
Dr. Zarkow, Mr. Zarkow, excuse me, I get confused. Can you comment briefly, very briefly, because my time's running out, about the issue of the dynamic between China and Russia?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the elevation. We saw that around the Winter Olympics, and they made this explicit when Putin and Xi met. We're not seeing it on the operational side in terms of the military support like we're seeing between Iran and Russia, but I think, as my colleague pointed out, it's the diplomatic support, legitimizing, equivocating in terms of what is and is not permissible, is where China, I think, is helping Russia the most. Legitimizing war crimes would be the first example I'd point to.
Thank you very much. Senator Wicker, please.